sort of staying on that subject of South Korean media, I want to actually dive into something else that is really popular, which is the viral sensation of a TV show, Squid Game. I love this series. I wrote a brief review about it a few weeks ago, and I thought it was such a great film or a great series that criticized capitalism and the debt crisis in South Korea. I know there are a lot of people who took different lessons away from the series, but I'm curious to know like what themes, what ideas really like what stood out for you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to talk about Squid Game. I did a whole episode on it, and then after the episode, I was like, damn, I didn't even talk about the old man. I didn't even talk about the elites, and there's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
much in it. And
yeah.
I saw you also saying like trying to say movie at the same time because it does feel like a movie. It
Hmm.
feels like it's the production quality and like I think a lot of people binged it as if it was a movie too. But I loved Squid Games, and I think, um, unlike Parasite or Crazy Rich Asians, I feel like well, Parasite had a lot of nuance, but in Squid Games, there's so many different characters, for one,
Hmm.
like so many different main characters that I'm like, oh, a lot of people around the world and people who are not Asian in the United States are watching this. Are they getting a better sense of how Asians look different from each other? Because that was one thing that was like I kept thinking about
Yeah.
like these people are all Korean except for the one dude who was Pakistani, but
Hmm.
and they look wildly different. And I'm hoping because I do see media as like a humanizing force. I do think that media, whether it's books or TV or music, can help humanize those that are different from ourselves if you don't have much contact with them. So that's one thing I kept thinking. I'm like, I wonder if just people watching this are learning like, oh yeah, okay, maybe not all Asians look alike, even though they're
Hmm.
all Korean, not
Hmm.
even like different nationalities. But yeah, capitalism for sure. The runaway capitalism and kind of the social inequality that you mentioned, also the debt crisis. Um, I feel like one main theme from also Parasite is like Korea trying to model itself off of the prosperity of the United States or the West. And I'm not convinced this is the best way to live. And I'm not saying I want to live in the rainforest without internet
Hmm.
or something like that, but I do think a simpler way of life where we're not focused on consumption of items or travel. That's like a whole thing. Like, I don't know what's going on with people and travel.
I agree.
Like, oh, I just want to travel. And okay, sorry, I don't need to go on a tangent. That also has a lot to do with, I think, cultural tourism. But anyway, I think that there's different ways to live where we're not like polluting our own air and water and things that we eat that can be a lot more beneficial to us, but it would have to be a bit removed from this hypercapitalism system we live in.
Hmm.
But I do like how the Squid Games is talking about um, what is valuable, like what is life, right? Like what do we
Yeah.
value in our life? Is it really just money? Are we just here to work and die? And it is critiquing a lot of the like individualistic aspect of things, or it asks us to critique it, right? So one of the things I'm wondering, I'm like, a lot of people see themselves as one of the players in the game,
Hmm.
as evidenced by people who dressed up as a Squid Game player for
Yeah.
Halloween, perhaps. But, how about, do we also admire or harbor some of the characteristics of the elites?
Hmm.
Um, because we do, and like I think that that's worth exploring too. Um, I or like the front man. And one of the questions I have is like, how did people in the pink suits get there? How
Hmm.
did the front man get there? Spoiler. Inho is like he used to be a regular old person, and his brother's like, what the fuck happened to you?
Mm-hmm.
So what happened along those lines? It's kind of like, how did these soldiers, the pink suits, fall in line? They were probably not these soldiers who just stood by and watched people and were complicit in these killings. But then there's, I think, the biggest piece of Squid Game is, well, they signed a contract. Like, well, they opted in. Like, all the players opted in and they're choosing this. And so it's like interesting to think of how we're watching this from like a player's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of folks really are fascinated by Squid Game because, like me, I wanted to know who was operating this, where did it come from?
Yeah, yeah.
And but at the same time, it's like, oh, well, we also have those characteristics of elites, and we're like, well, people who made this Halloween costume for me, and
Yeah.
I mean, I'm complicit in this. Like, I dressed up as a shark with my fiance and our dog. We were all a family of sharks, and I bought a onesie that is probably only going to be used like once a year, maybe. And I'm like, well, the people who made this are probably in these like awful conditions. And I think a lot of folks who buy things for like one-time use are like, well, the people in those conditions, they chose to be in those conditions,
Mm-hmm.
without looking at these like systemic issues of what caused Korea's debt crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is all the borrowing that they've done from other countries. So it's very interesting. Like, what do you think about the connection between the way like we do or do not relate to players or the elites in the film, the show?
Oh, I love that because I think what's so fascinating about Squid Game is that the massive success. I mean, you're talking about like even just on an age level. I mean, you're seeing from you know older folks who are obviously critiquing the movie and breaking it down, analyzing it, down to children who are like, you know, recreating the Squid Games in Roblox and in, Minecraft and shit. And so it's like, you're talking about the success of, as a piece of art, something that is able to convey a message in just a wide range. You can watch it in a very topical way that's just like, oh, here are just people trying out some challenges. It's almost like an obstacle course, like kids can watch it in that perspective. But then as you go along and as you start to strip away from the individual aspects of like, oh, I'm like Ali, or I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
player one.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to get into the questions of like, who are these elites, and how did this game start, and whose fault is it that this happened this way, or that this
Mm-hmm.
person got into this position. And you were sort of talking about like, how did the front man get there, how did the people in those pink suits get there. And I think it all boils back to an awareness that the game is being played, that there is a system going on, that there is a reason why things are the way that they are. Because oftentimes people are so fixated on the individual of, I gotta get mine, I gotta win, I'm in this shit, like I need to do whatever I can. And I think it all goes back to the conversation of the game that we're playing, and in the in the context of capitalism, um, it really is just a testament to the way that capitalism warps so many of our personalities, and so many of us who might have good good a good foundation of morals, and maybe even like a good set of desires of what we want to do with the world. And yet, because of these extreme conditions, we're forced into coming for each other's necks, not trying to attack the front man, not trying to go for the people who are in red. And it's it's intricate, because it's like you can, on one hand, it's like you understand the cruelty of the game, but then you also understand the dire situations that some of these characters are in, that are
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, like if I'm like millions of dollars in debt, like I could see falling for that dude in the subway who wanted to play, like, so like I and I can totally get that. And especially when you look at how debt is structured to be so predatory to
Mm-hmm.
people of color, people who are lower income. And like I said, it really is sad in that sense, that it warps so many of us. But I think you really do make a good point that it's interesting how some people are able to just watch it from purely the individual level of like, oh, that's me, that's my character. But I'm not sure if you saw, but like, there's like a huge reaction from a lot of conservative people who watch Squid Game, and they're like, actually, this isn't anti-capitalist. This is about snowflakes, or this is about this is about communism. And I think it's so funny because it really just shows like how many Americans don't know that like that's you too. The Squid Game. We have our own Squid Game.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I know. I'm like, okay, so there's Bezos, he's an elite. Like, you can like just put faces underneath those elite masks and you already know who it is. Yeah, I think it's so interesting also. Like, I think the underlying message is compassion and working together and having more of an egalitarian society is what wins.
Yeah.
Because that's what is rewarded throughout the game, and that is what we see, again, spoiler, at the end, who triumphs is somebody who's compassionate. And you still have like the old man kind of questioning at the very end, like, do you really believe in humanity? Like, are there good people out there? So it does become, even though it's like a little hidden, it is still kind of like a superhero, like good versus bad.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many people got that message that bad is like this super hierarchical structure, because it's so entertaining as just from the game perspective. Like, okay, who's going to win this game? Okay, and what are the player dynamics? And I do think for me, that's why I really liked it, is it's kind of critiquing like the reason why we have these problems is because we're so stratified. And the elites also are not all American.
Yeah.
There's like a couple in there speaking, I think one is speaking in Mandarin and another has like a Japanese accent. So it's like, we're doing it to ourselves. It's not purely from a Western colonial mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's great observation, because I know that a lot of people who are anti-racist often talked about like, oh, the elites, they're representing white supremacy, but like you said, the inclusion of those other characters really does speak to the way that capitalism as a system, like it doesn't necessarily only want to have white folks on its team. Like it benefits from everybody pitching into this corrupt system. And even just going into the spoiler of the front man of who he was, and the fact that he was one of these people,